What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of OC and TJ Week 15 edition. It's your boy OC back with another picks episode, and a lot has happened over the past 7 days. Bill Belichick is now the head coach of North Carolina, which is flat out bizarre. I'm still trying to process that to this day. The Seahawks are still first place in the NFC West. The Bucs somehow stumbled back into the division lead for the NFC South, and some teams are on the verge of collapse, while others are trying to rise back up to the top. So with that being said, speaking of which, let's get into Thursday Night Football. Excuse me. We got the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Los Angeles Rams in Santa Clara. It's going to be an outstanding game, and this is a do or die game for both teams because whoever wins this game is going to have a better chance of clinching the 7th seed or even higher if they somehow aim for the 5th or 6th spots. The Rams are coming off probably their most impressive victory over the last 2 seasons, actually easily their most complete victory of the year. They beat Josh Allen at home 44-42. Their offense was flat out unbelievable. Matthew Stafford didn't take a single sack or throw a turnover. Puka Nacua had an outstanding game. He caught 12 passes for over 160 yards and the touchdown to put the game on ice. The defense had its struggles with Josh Allen. He totaled 424 of Buffalo's 445 yards of offense, and he scored all 6 of their touchdowns. So if the Bills had won that game, he would have easily vaulted his way to the top of the MVP ladder board, along with him and Saquon Barkley. But the biggest reason why I think the Rams won this game, more so than the offense, is because their special teams came up with the play of the game by blocking a punt in the middle of the second quarter and running it back for a touchdown. That was what allowed the Rams to finish the first half with a 24-14 lead and then begin the third quarter with a touchdown to go up 31-14. And yes, the Buffalo Bills did everything they could to fight back. The Rams punted once in that whole game, which is what allowed the Bills to make it a one-score game. But every time the Rams got the ball back, for the most part, they got points on the board. And if they had somehow turned the ball over or if they stalled out late in the fourth quarter, then it would have been an entirely different story. And I get that there was some bad clock management from the Bills' end because if they didn't try to run a quarterback sneak on 1st and goal on their final drive and then burn a timeout, then they would have had at least 40 seconds to try to get into field goal range. But the Rams were the better team in this game. Their offense was flat out dynamic. Their defense forced 2 critical punts, but it was the special teams that really prevailed and provided the game's biggest turning point. The 49ers just blew out the Chicago Bears 38-13. I was actually really surprised that the 49ers were going to win, and it's not because I thought that the Bears were the better team, but it's just that the 49ers were just dealing with so many injuries on both sides of the ball. Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason were out. Obviously, you didn't have Trent Williams. You didn't have Nick Bosa. Drake Greenlaw was still on IR. Javon Hargrave been out all year. I don't think they activated Talanoa Hufanga. They were still without Travarius Ward. So the 49ers were coming into this game really desperate. And from the first play all the way to the very end, they did not make this a contest. I mean, Brock Purdy was great. He only threw 5 incompletions, had 325 yards and 2 touchdowns. Isaac Orendo, who got his first NFL start, he ran for about 75 yards and a touchdown before he ended up spraining his foot. I'm sorry. But then George Kittle was really the star of the show. He caught 6 passes for 156 yards. Jawan Jennings caught 2 touchdowns. And the defense was just flat out suffocating because all you really needed to know was the entire first half and how big of a mismatch that turned out to be. The 49ers had 319 total yards of offense. They were 4 for 7 on third down, and they picked up 14 first downs. You look at the Bears. 1 first down, 4 yards. 4. And 0 for 5 on third down. And the fact that they were even up 24-0, the 49ers, at halftime was a little bit startling because the score should easily have been a lot worse. But you know what? Even though the Bears threw a couple late punches in the second half, they had no impact because the 49ers did everything they could to pull away, and they were suffocated on both sides of the ball. I already brought up the offensive numbers, but defensively, they held Caleb Williams to just 134 yards. They sacked him 7 times, and they gave up just 14 first downs. And even with those atrocious numbers in the first half, Chicago still only finished with 162 total yards of offense. So I think that this is going to be an outstanding game. I think both offenses are going to show up. They're going to play out of their minds. I think both defenses are going to be on their heels for the entire night, but I don't really see the 49ers losing to the Rams twice, because if you remember in week 3, San Francisco was up 21-7. They ended up blowing that one because not only did the offense fall flat and the defense fall apart, but the special teams gave up 2 critical plays that helped build a lot of momentum for the Rams down the stretch. So I think that, the 49ers, I think they, they're going to do everything they can offensively to get an early lead. Isaac Orendo, he's trying to play tonight, which is flat out, I think it's flat out impressive considering that sprained injuries in the National Football League, they take longer than 3 to 4 weeks. But here's the thing. If they cannot find a way to get another stop or create pressure like the Buffalo Bills failed to do last week, then they're not going to win this football game, and they're going to get swept, and their playoff hopes are going to flush right down the toilet. But I think it'll be really close. I think we're going to finally see the toughness and the warrior that has been building up inside Brock Purdy. And you know what? Listen, just because the Rams have a hot night one day, just doesn't mean they're going to pick up where they left off 4 days later. So we'll see what happens. I think it could honestly go either way because both offenses are very promising in this one. But I think the 49ers will find a way to pull it out in the final seconds, 31-28. All right, now we get to this Sunday game between the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants. I feel like I should just cut this short. I'm just going to pick Baltimore. It's going to be a blowout. If you watched the Giants game last week against the Saints, all you needed to know was what flew over the stadium. Please, Mr. Mara, enough. Please fix this dumpster fire. That's just been a microcosm of how this whole season has gone, and really it's just a small indication of how that game turned out. Because Drew Lock failed to complete his first 8 pass attempts. He finished by completing just 43% of his passes. The defense, before Derek Carr fractured his non-throwing hand, they let the team get down 14-3 at one point. And yet somehow, some way, it came down to a 35-yard field goal from Graham Gano to potentially send this game into overtime. I mean, both teams were just flat out atrocious. The fact that this was even a close ball game just shows how garbage both teams have been. The Saints scored 2 touchdowns on 14 drives. Derek Carr, before he got hurt, he only threw for 219 yards, and he gifted the Giants their second interception of the whole season. And the Giants committed 12 more penalties for 112 yards. It appeared that the game was going to end with an interception by Demario Davis, but the defense let Drew Lock march down the field and set up the field goal attempt. But thank goodness for Brian Bresee, because I did not want to see another 10 minutes added to this game. And I don't think the rest of the world wanted to either. So, I mean, it was just an ugly defeat. And it's now their 8th straight defeat. So, I mean, this team is just flat out dead at this point. I mean, they don't have a quarterback. They don't really have anybody else on their offensive side besides Malik Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy, who were held in check on Sunday afternoon. The O-line is still a wreck. The defense is injured to hell, and they've been ineffective. And, yeah, it really is a dumpster fire. And honestly, I think that's putting it lightly, because dumpster fires are at least easy to put out. This is just something else. So, yeah, Baltimore, you're coming off the bye week. This should be a relaxing victory, but if somehow, some way this turns into a close game, then the Ravens might be one and done in the playoffs. So, in terms of a final score, I'll say the Ravens win 41-7. I don't think anybody's going to really pay attention to what happens in this game. And I don't blame them because there are a lot more exciting matchups out there. All right. Here, speaking of ugly matchups, let's get to this one between the Jets and the Jaguars. Oh, God. The Jaguars actually won, which is, I guess, okay, but they cost themselves a chance to get Travis Hunter because they've now fallen to the 5th overall pick in the NFL draft order. All it took was one touchdown to beat the Titans, and Tank Bigsby did that with a touchdown run in the 4th quarter. Just a couple of drives after Cam Little provided them their first points of the game. Their defense carried them to victory. They didn't allow a single touchdown. They held Will Levis to just 163 yards. They sacked him twice. There were plenty of 4th down attempts where Tennessee had a chance to capitalize and handle their business at home. But at the same time, it's just they failed to close in on their chances. I mean, Calvin Ridley was the only receiver that caught more than 3 passes. And, I mean, it took 2 field goals from Nick Folk to score all of their points. And when the 4th quarter arrived, their defense just flat out fell apart and just said, all right, we give up. We've done everything we can, and we're probably just going to stumble into another painful defeat. So, honestly, Jaguars won, but at what cost? Because if Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson are somehow still there at the end of the season, then, you might as well write off 2025. The Jets, on the other hand, they had an 8-point lead in the 4th quarter against the Miami Dolphins, who somehow, some way played down a competition. The Dolphins scored on all 4 of their drives in the first half, but 3 of them were field goals. Aaron Rodgers threw for 300 yards for the first time in 3 years, which is just flat out mind-boggling considering the fact that he's supposed to be in the Hall of Fame, when it's all said and done. Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, they combined for about 229 receiving yards or 223 receiving yards. So they were doing everything they could in the passing game. Breece Hall was out, but they still managed to have a decent day on the ground. And again, you're up 23-15. All you needed was one more score on the board to close the deal and put the game away. And that was when everything fell apart, because not only does Aaron Rodgers get sacked to begin the period, but the Dolphins offense just walks down the field, gets it 1st and goal because of a pass interference penalty by DJ Reed. Tua finds Tyreek Hill for a touchdown on 4th and goal. And then on the 2-point conversion, Jalen Waddle snags a catch to tie the game. Aaron Rodgers has a chance to, get his team in a field goal range on his final drive, which he did successfully by the 2-minute warning. But after he takes a sack from Zach Sealer, Devontae Adams makes a catch on 3rd down and goes out of bounds. So they're forced to kick a go-ahead field goal with about 52 seconds left. And then the special teams decides to lay a big egg by giving up a huge kickoff return by Malik Washington to his own 45-yard line. Jason Sanders puts on the finishing touches from 52 yards away. And the minute that the Dolphins won the coin toss, the game was over because they marched down the field in just 8 plays. And the unsung hero of that possession was Jonnu Smith, who didn't catch a single drive or catch a single pass through the first 60 minutes. In overtime, he caught 3 for 44 and the game-winning touchdown from 10 yards away. And now the Jets are officially eliminated from playoff contention. Their season is over. And even if they somehow finish the year on a high note, this is probably the most disappointing team in the NFL this season. Easily one of the more disappointing teams in NFL history, or one of the biggest, letdowns. Because with all that talent they assembled, the fact that they acquired Aaron Rodgers, the fact that they drafted Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, that they acquired Devontae Adams, that they were able to get Hassan Reddick out of his holdout, this should not have been the case scenario. Now, all of a sudden, the head coach is gone, the general manager's gone, the offensive coordinator is demoted, and Mike Williams gets traded, and everything else just keeps imploding on itself. And now the Jets are going to be right back to where they were just a few years ago, which is blowing it all up again and starting over from scratch. The same situation that this team was trying to avoid just 2 years ago, or just last year, rather, when they made the trade for Aaron Rodgers. So, heading into this game in Duval, I think the Jets will win. Breece Hall is going to be out, most likely, because he hasn't practiced for the last 2 weeks because of a knee injury. But I still think that their offense still has plenty enough talent to take advantage of a very weak and really just fragile Jacksonville defense. And Mac Jones got bailed out with 2 interceptions against the Tennessee Titans. I guarantee that it will not happen against this Jets team, because Aaron Rodgers might not be the same quarterback that he once was, but he at least has proven that he has something left in the tank. So I'll pick the Jets in a very ugly and boring game. I'll say they win 20-3. Okie dokie. Now we get to the Dallas Cowboys versus the Carolina Panthers. Both of them are coming off heartbreaking losses. I'll start with the Panthers because they lost 22-16 to this team right here, the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, Carolina had plenty of chances to pull off the upset, but every time they had a chance to get points on the board, they completely failed, or the Eagles found a way to respond. And when it was time for the Eagles to capitalize on their opportunities in the fourth quarter, they fell flat and came up short. I mean, when you look at the numbers right here, Carolina did everything they could to make it a competitive game. You know, they held Jalen Hurts to 108 yards. They sacked him 4 times. Bryce Young didn't have, like, the best game per his standards, but, you know, 191 passing yards. He scored. He threw a touchdown pass. You know, Adam Thielen had a great game. He had 9 catches for 102 yards. Chuba Hubbard ran for over 90 yards. So, I mean, I was actually pretty surprised that this turned into a pretty close and competitive ball game. But like I said, you had 2 chances to convert on 4th down, and on the first try, you have Adam Thielen wide open, you know, before the 2-minute warning, and they misfire on that. And Bryce Young decides to throw it into tight coverage to Xavier Leggett, which is broken up by Darius Slay. The next drive, it appeared to end with a wide open touchdown pass to Leggett to give them the lead, but the pass goes right through his hands. They have to go for it on 4th down. Young tries to find Adam Thielen down the left side, and that pass gets broken up once again. I mean, the Eagles weren't that great. I mean, there were definitely a lot of things that they could have corrected, but at the end of the day, they were the better team. Jalen Hurts scored 3 touchdowns. And like I said, anytime the Panthers got on the board, for the most part, the Philadelphia Eagles, they found a way to respond, especially near the end of the first half when Bryce Young threw a costly interception to C.J. Gardner-Johnson that allowed the Eagles to take a 14-10 lead at halftime. And that ended up being the biggest difference in the ball game. The Cowboys, after this loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, like their playoff hopes just completely went down the drain because they get off to a very slow start in the first half. They're down 17-10. Their defense gives up 3 scores on the first 5 drives. Cooper Rush, after throwing a wide open touchdown pass to CeeDee Lamb on 4th down on the opening drive, they only settle for 3 more points, and Cooper Rush throws an interception. But in the second half, they did everything they could to even the score. You know, they go boom, boom, boom down the field on their first possession of the third quarter to score a touchdown. Then Malik Hooker picks off Joe Burrow to set up a go-ahead field goal for Brandon Aubrey. But after Cincinnati tied this game up at 20, it really just came down to which defense was going to get the final stop. Because if you look at how these final drives turned out, the Dallas Cowboys, they ran just 7 plays on their final 2 possessions and picked up the grand total of 13 yards, while the Cincinnati Bengals only picked up 28 yards on their next 2 drives. So it was going to come down to the very end, and Dallas's defense, they forced a critical punt by the 2-minute warning to give Cooper Rush the ball back and pull off the same exact thing that he did against the same Bengals team just 2 years ago at Jerry World, which was the game-winning drive. And it appeared that the Dallas Cowboys were going to get tremendous field position because they blocked the punt and it rolls inside, the 35-yard line? But Amadi Oruwariye, a backup quarterback, decides to let the ball go through his hands as it gets past the line of scrimmage. He tries to make the catch. It falls out of his hands, and the Bengals recover to give their offense a new set of downs. A few plays later, Jamar Chase gets open on the boundary. He turns the corner, and he takes off for the game-winning touchdown from 40 yards away. Cooper Rush got the ball back with less than a minute. Trey Hendrickson comes up with a huge sack, and on fourth down, Cooper Rush overthrows Jake Ferguson, and the game's over. So, I mean, that loss just completely cost them a chance of making the playoffs because their offense got out to a slow start and fell flat, on their final drive. The defense fell apart, and the special teams made the one mistake that completely cost them the game. And the weird part about this upcoming matchup on Sunday, is the fact that the Panthers are 3-point favorites. So Dallas has their backs against the walls. They're technically not eliminated from playoff contention yet, but I think if there's any week for them to bounce back, it's this one. Because even though the Panthers have been more likable and respectable, they still find a way to lose ball games. And they just keep getting in their own way. And, Dallas' defense has played a lot better over the last month or so. So I think that it'll help them out in this one. But I think if the Carolina Panthers, if they just minimize the mistakes, they could potentially win. But I'll say Dallas holds on 23-20. All right. Let's go to this next game between the Washington Commanders versus the New Orleans Saints. I'm going with Washington. I don't really think it's going to be that close. When you're forced to start Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler, then you have no shot. I mean, the Saints are just dead. They're broken. Their offense is injured. Their defense, it's been better, but you just don't know how much energy they're going to have the more the offense continues to stall out. And the Washington Commanders, they're going to be fresh on both sides of the ball. And if there's any time for them to pull off a complete ass kicking, it's this one. Because if you can do it to the Tennessee Titans in your home building, then I don't think it should be any different against this Saints team. So give me the Washington Commanders 40-10. All right. Now we get to the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Tennessee Titans. Already previewed both games, so there's not much that needs to be said. Brian Callahan has a chance to get revenge against his former team and quite possibly end Cincinnati's playoff hopes. So there is a little bit of intrigue and excitement there, but I think the Cincinnati Bengals will win. I love their offense a lot better, and even though the defense has flaws and issues, I don't think that it's going to be one of those games where Will Levis decides to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdown passes, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I think it'll be really close. I think it'll come down to the wire because, the Cincinnati Bengals just refuse to make things easy this season. But as long as they have Joe Burrow, I never really want to doubt them. So I'll say the Cincinnati Bengals, they pull it off on the road to keep their playoff hopes alive or whatever playoff hopes they have left. In terms of a final score, I'll go with 30-27. You know what? I think it'll be a fun game. I hope it is because, I always love it when both offenses go back and forth, and it comes down to that final drive. So no complaints about that whatsoever, even if it's the Tennessee Titans. So, all right, now we get to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cleveland Browns. Can the Chiefs just stop? Can they just stop it already? It's not the problem that I have with them. It's not the fact that they're 12-1 and atop the AFC. I honestly thought that they were going to be in that position at the beginning of the season. So I have no complaints about the record. But the way that they keep winning football games has just been so annoying and infuriating because we know that they are 10 times better than the product they put out there every single freaking week. For the third game in a row, they followed the exact same script. Comfortable start of the first half, let the opponent hang around and potentially take the lead or tie the game, and then realize, oh crap, we're supposed to be the back-to-back Super Bowl champions. Let's get out of this freaking funk. And they barely do enough in the end to escape with a victory. This game against the Chargers, no different. 13-0 lead at halftime. Then the defense gives up 14 unanswered points to begin the second half. Both defenses, hold their grounds to begin the fourth quarter. They, both the Chiefs and the Chargers have to settle for field goals. But Patrick Mahomes gets the ball with 4.5 minutes left. And it's more than enough time for him to just simply walk down the field and get his team in a field goal range. And one clutch third down conversion of Travis Kelce allowed them to run the clock out. But if it were an easy field goal from that, you're right, like a simple one that just went through the uprights with no complications, I would have said, you know what? All right. It was a defensive battle. Patrick Mahomes made the most out of his opportunities. Not that big of a deal. Seen a lot worse finishes from them. But to see a doink off the post and then squib inside the uprights, like they just don't stop. And I don't even know if they're going to be able to, I don't know if they're going to, let me start over because I'm just trying to let the words process through my mind because it's just been that infuriating. I don't know if there's going to be a team that will, not let them escape in the playoffs. Like, I think that the Chiefs, when you have Patrick Mahomes, when you have Andy Reid and Travis Kelce and, a well-coached defense, it's just unless the team does not screw up, unless the team decides to, okay, we're not going to turn the ball over, we're going to play lights out, that's the only way you're going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'm sorry that I'm stammering. It's taken a while, but that's just how speechless and how mind-boggling that this season has been for Kansas City. But at least they're doing better than the Cleveland Browns, who are officially eliminated from playoff contention after a 27-14 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I knew that they were going to lose this game anyway because I didn't think Pittsburgh was going to let the Browns win this game twice. But I mean, in the first quarter, Cleveland picked up where they left off 2 weeks ago. They got off to a pretty commanding lead in the first quarter. Jameis Winston threw a 35-yard touchdown pass to Jerry Jeudy. Russell Wilson punted the ball on 4 of his first 5 drives. But once again, an interception from Jameis Winston to Keanu Benton swung all the entire momentum around in that game. And it allowed Pittsburgh to score 24 unanswered points and take a commanding 27-7 lead. Dustin Hopkins missed 2 makeable field goals. Russell Wilson, without George Pickens, was able to throw for 153 yards and 2 touchdown passes. And Cleveland was able to get on the board, but with 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And just for a slight second, it looked like they were going to be able to come back because Cordell Patterson fumbled the football after Cleveland scored their second touchdown of the game. But Winston threw his second interception of the game on his following possession. And when Pittsburgh punted it back, Kadarius Toney muffs the punt, and the Steelers take possession, and they run the clock out. Now, honestly, I can see the Browns pulling off this upset. As long as Jameis Winston doesn't turn the ball over, then I think that they're going to be good because, listen, we've seen their offense have tremendous performances against the Ravens. We saw them beat Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago when their offense prevailed in the fourth quarter. And the Chiefs' defense has been limping over the last 3 to 4 seasons. It's been because of a combined. It's due to a combination of injuries and just the fact that they've been worn out over the last 3 years because they pretty much played, let's see, September through February for 2 straight years, and they could potentially do it again. So that is quite possibly, if I do the math here, September, October, November, December, January, February. So that's 12 months in that 2-year span. And then September, October, November, December, that's 16 months. So be quite honest, I think the Cleveland Browns, they're going to play with nothing to lose. I don't think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think both offenses are going to be ready to play because the Browns defense has completely regressed from last season. But listen, if Jameis Winston doesn't turn the ball over and if their defense is able to force a couple of critical stops, then I would not be surprised one bit if this turns into an upset. So I will pick the Cleveland Browns to win 27-23. And it will be a close ball game. And if the Chiefs somehow win, then it will not be surprising in the slightest. But you know what? Their luck has to run out at some point. And this is definitely a trap game. Travis Kelce, he'll be back in Cleveland Heights, the place where he grew up. But I don't know. I think the Browns are not going to let their season end on a sour note just yet. So we'll see. All right, next up, we got the Houston Texans versus the Miami Dolphins. Houston is coming off a bye week. The Dolphins, it took until overtime for them to beat the New York Jets. And to be quite honest, that is the least convincing victory I have seen for that football team since Tua's been the starting quarterback and since Mike McDaniel has been the head coach. I mean, you're down 23-15 in the fourth quarter. Your defense does enough to force a couple of critical stops to give their offense the ball back and send the game into overtime. But at the same time, like 3 field goals in the first half, no points in the third quarter, defense giving up 300 yards to Aaron Rodgers, the first time that's happened to him in 3 years. And it took until that for you to win the football game. That just shows that they've learned nothing from last year. Because while they line it up against bottom feeders, they are coming up small and smaller against the teams that they need to beat to get in the playoff race, like the Buffalo Bills or the Baltimore Ravens or the Green Bay Packers or the Kansas City Chiefs. And they lay a freaking egg every single time, and they don't learn from any of their shortcomings. So in this game, I don't see it any differently because even though the Texans have been alarming on both sides of the ball, their offense has been shaky, the defense falls apart at the worst possible time. The Miami Dolphins, when it comes to the games that they need to win the most, especially on the road, they fall apart. And that's a big reason why I didn't have them making the playoffs at the beginning of the season. So I don't have this as a really good game. I think it'll be low scoring. I think that the Texans, they're going to be fresh coming off the bye week. Hopefully they've learned from what they've done, from what they've been doing wrong over the last 13 weeks of this season, and that they come out with a more aggressive mindset. But I think because they're at home and because they have a better defense and because that their offense can attack a middle-of-the-pack Dolphins defense, I think they'll do just enough in the end, as long as they don't turn the ball over. So I'll say the Texans win 23-20. All right. And by the way, the cold has not gone away, so feeling a lot better than I did the last episode, but we're still fighting. All right, now we get to the Denver Broncos versus the Indianapolis Colts. We have entered the late afternoon window. Both teams are coming off of a bye. I'm just going to jump straight into it. I think the Denver Broncos are going to win, A, because they're at home, and because they have one of the toughest home field advantages in the league. B, because I have a lot more faith in their offense, because at least we've seen more consistency from Bo Nix than we have with Anthony Richardson. And more importantly, they have one of the best defenses in football. They lead the league in sacks. They're one of the top 5 scoring units, and they're one of the top teams in turnover differential. So while the Colts are ranked near the bottom in a lot of those categories. So I think the Broncos will be able to pull off a convincing victory. I think it'll be scrappy early on, but I think that the more that Anthony Richardson begins to falter and the more that the Colts offense begins to stumble, the more that, Denver will be able to take advantage of it, especially down the stretch. So I'll say the Broncos win a pretty low-scoring affair because, Denver's offense doesn't have the most explosive talent. But listen, if you could beat the Atlanta Falcons 38-6, I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow hit that mark. But I won't go there just yet. I will say that the Broncos will win this game 27-9. All right. Now we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games left. Let's get to the New England Patriots versus the Arizona Cardinals. And by the way, I know that I didn't talk about the Patriots and Colts game last week. That was intentional because both teams were on a bye. So I'll talk about it here since, the Patriots are in the late window, or the next team that's in the late window. That was, of all the losses that happened for this team over the season, this is the one game where I truly did not know how they lost that. Because They had 400 total yards of offense. They were 6 for 11 on third down. They were up 24-17 in the fourth quarter. Anthony Richardson threw 2 interceptions, yet they still lost because Anthony Richardson did exactly what he did 2 weeks ago against the Jets, which was he overcame all the obstacles that came his way, and, he pulled off a miraculous game-winning drive with not only a touchdown pass to Alec Pierce on 4th and goal, but the go-ahead 2-point conversion. And there were a few setbacks that the New England Patriots had that completely cost them. Joey Sly missing a 25-yard chip shot at the end of the first half. Drake May throwing a costly interception in the red zone, that cost them to stall out and give the Colts more breathing room. And then at the final seconds of the game, they tried some desperation 68-yard field goal from Joey Sly, and it comes up just short of the crossbar. Those were 3 huge mistakes that kept setting the team back. And even though they were up by 7, they easily could have been up by a lot more, because on every single drive, they got into Colts territory. And there were plenty more where they got into field goal range. But they either settled for 3 or they completely shot themselves in the foot with boneheaded penalties or costly sacks or that interception that I just talked about. The Arizona Cardinals, they're in the same situation, because even though the record is better, they have fallen apart in these last 3 games. 2 of them to the same team, because after getting off to a terrific start at home in this game, where you throw a 41-yard touchdown to Michael Wilson and the defense holds Geno Smith to 3 points on his opening possession, the team falls apart. Kyler Murray threw 2 interceptions to allow the Seahawks to score 14 unanswered points. And after a 51-yard touchdown run from Zach Charbonnet, they were down 24-10 at halftime. And in the middle of the third quarter, 27-10. They were able to get a touchdown in the second half to make it a 9-point game. But when they had chances to make a comeback in the fourth quarter, they fell flat, because on their first drive of the period, they go 3 and out. The next drive, they have to settle for a 40-yard field goal for Chad Ryland, in which the ball hits through the uprights, and that allows the Seahawks to put the game away with a field goal from Jason Myers. And then the Cardinals had some late desperation drive with less than a minute left, and Kyler Murray takes a sack to end that possession. Now you're 6-7. You're not even the 8th best team in your conference. You've pretty much handed the division over to Seattle. And if you continue to fall like this, you might be in last place in the division once again. So, which was pretty much unthinkable just 3 weeks ago when you were 6-4 and one of the biggest surprise stories of the league. And you're right back to where you were in the first 6 weeks when you were 2-4. Nothing was going right on either side of the ball, and no one really had any expectations for you moving forward. So hopefully they bounce back in this game, because if they somehow lose to this Patriots team with no talent or discipline whatsoever, then that may be a sign they're done. Just like the Chicago Bears in the past, along with the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals in week 1. So I'll say the Cardinals win. I would not be surprised if the Patriots somehow BS their way to a victory, because when you don't have expectations for them, they'll somehow fluke their way to a victory. But the Cardinals, they have more explosiveness and speed on their offense. Their defense plays with a lot more passion, and they're well better coached. And the New England Patriots right now have none of those things at that particular moment. So I have hope that they can make amends in the final 4 games of the season. But, I mean, at this point, they have the 3rd overall pick. They could draft Travis Hunter if they wanted to, but one player is not going to fix the amount of holes and issues that they have on so many different positions, at so many different positions. So, give me the Cardinals in this one. I'll say they win 27-13. All right. Now we get to the game that everybody really wants to watch, the Detroit Lions versus the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo put up a strong fight against Los Angeles Rams. Josh Allen was tremendous. He had 424 yards of the 445 that Buffalo totaled throughout the entire afternoon. He scored all 6 of their touchdowns. But unfortunately, it was just a one-man show because their defense only forced 1 punt. the special teams gave up a blocked punt that pretty much gave LA all the momentum it needed to hold on at the end. And, you know, they were down 31-14 in the middle of the third quarter as a result. And even though they did everything they could to fight back and make it a one-score game, they couldn't get a stop when it mattered the most. And it bit them in the butt, in the final few minutes when Puka Nacua caught a bubble screen on a cover zero blitz and turned on the Jets for the icing touchdown. The Detroit Lions, they're coming off a walk-off field goal game as well, where they grinded it out and were able to get the final points on the board in the final seconds. So it was the exact opposite ending. They took a 17-7 lead at halftime. Things were going well. They were playing extremely aggressive and fundamentally sound on both sides of the ball, which is not impressive considering that their defense dealt with several injuries on all three levels. I'm so sorry. But the reason why it was only a 3-point game was because the offense not only threw an interception on their opening drive of the game, but decided to go for it on fourth down on their opening drive, and it completely and predictably failed, which allowed the Packers to score 14 points off of those huge opportunities. But to Detroit's credit, when they were up, not only did their offense score 2 huge touchdowns to put Detroit ahead multiple times, but their defense on Jordan Love's final possession of the game forced a huge field goal thanks to an offensive pass interference penalty from Christian Watson to tie the game up at 31. And, Detroit's offense had more than a few minutes left to get into field goal range. Detroit converts on 4th and 1, barely completing a handoff to David Montgomery as Jared Goff falls down to the ground, and allowed the Detroit Lions to run the clock out, and Jake Bates nailed the walk-off field goal to give Detroit their 11th straight victory. So heading into this game at Ford Field, both offenses are going to look tremendous. I think that it's going to be an outstanding game. But listen, if there's any time for Detroit to lose their second game of the year, it's this one, because the Bills are going to come in swinging. Their defense is going to want to have a more aggressive game plan than they had the last week. But if there's anybody that's willing to handle the pressure, it's this Detroit Lions team. So I think the Lions will handle it. They're at home. I think that their offense can attack a lot of the weaknesses and some of the deficiencies that the Bills defense has, but it's going to be really close. Jared Goff and Josh Allen are going to have tremendous performances, and it's really going to come down to which team has the ball in their hands last and which defense will get the final stop. So I'll say the Lions win 31-28. All right. Now we get to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Chargers. I already talked about the Chargers, down 13-0 at halftime, doing enough to take the lead in the final minutes of the fourth quarter, but you give Patrick Mahomes too much time. The defense crumbles down the stretch, and the offense just looked very sluggish. And now you might not have Justin Herbert in this game because he sprained his ankle yet again. 2 ankle sprains in just over 3 months. So that's pretty alarming. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers somehow stumbling into first place in the division after an ugly victory against the Las Vegas Raiders, that should not have been close in the fourth quarter because they got up to a 14-0 start in the first quarter on their first 2 drives. Baker Mayfield goes 8 of 9 for 92 yards with 2 touchdown passes. And then since then, for the rest of the game, Baker Mayfield barely completed 50% of his passes. He barely threw for 100 yards. He threw 2 interceptions and lost a fumble, and he got sacked 4 times, which allowed the Raiders to make it a 4-point game at halftime. But after Aiden O'Connell went down with a gruesome knee injury, their offense completely shut down. The defense looked vulnerable. The Bucs finally woke up on both sides of the ball and did what they should have done in the first place, which was to put the game away. So this game it's a toss-up because the Chargers should have a better team on both sides of the ball when they're fully healthy because you got the quarterback, you got the running game, you got the wide receivers. The defense is still, one of the best in the league. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they got a quarterback who is one of the top 3 guys in passing yards and passing touchdowns, but he's also second in interceptions. The defense has been completely below average. They're the third worst passing group. And because the Atlanta Falcons have been falling apart over the last 4 games, and the Saints and Panthers are not even close to playoff contention, the Bucs are in first place because their division is completely hot puke. So, I don't know. This game will be very tough to predict. I mean, the Chargers are at home, so they have the advantage. But here's the thing. If Justin Herbert is not healthy and if he can't go, then I don't think the Chargers are going to win this game. I'll go with Tampa for now, but I think it'll be really ugly. It's going to be a very close game. And as long as Baker Mayfield is the best player on the football field, then they'll have a chance. So I'll say the Buccaneers still escape with this one, 24-20. All right, now we get to the Battle of Pennsylvania between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you look at their matchups in the 2000s, whoever's at home usually gets the upper hand and comes out with a victory. So I don't think anything different is going to happen here because even though the Steelers have the fourth best rushing defense in the National Football League, I just don't know if the Steelers are going to be able to pull it out if the Steelers offense decides to look mediocre. Unless Jalen Hurts decides to throw 3 interceptions and take 5 sacks and have one of the worst games in his career, then I don't expect the Pittsburgh Steelers to massively outgun the Philadelphia Eagles. I just don't, because you're not going to have George Pickens. The offense was average at best against the Cleveland Browns defense that has been completely abysmal compared to what it was last year. And more importantly, not only do you have Saquon Barkley to worry about on the offensive side, but you've got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and a passing game that is just trying to reestablish their footing. Obviously, you heard the post-game comments last week from A.J. Brown saying that the passing game needs to improve. So I think if it's any week for it to happen, it's this one. Because we all know that Pittsburgh's going to do everything they can to shut Saquon down. But what's going to happen when you have one of the top 5 wide receivers in the game, or top 10 if you really want to go there, Devontae Smith, who's trying to reestablish his role as a number 2, and a quarterback that is one of the most mobile in the league, and an offensive line that is still, far above everybody else. So I'll say the Eagles win. It'll be a really close game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I like their offense a lot more. And more importantly, I think their defense is going to have the more aggressive mindset, and they're going to force a couple of key turnovers that will shift the momentum of the game. So I'll say the Eagles win 24-14. All right, now we have a few more games on our docket. We got the Green Bay Packers versus the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's defense carried them to a victory once again. The offense took advantage of their opportunities, and they swept the Arizona Cardinals with a 38-18 victory on the road to finish the week 8-5 in first place in the NFC West, while the Green Bay Packers came up just short against the Detroit Lions because Christian Watson had an up-and-down performance. Not only did he fumble a costly ball at the end of the first half or near the end of the first half, but he was also flagged for offensive pass interference on the final drive that forced them to kick a field goal instead of potentially scoring the game-winning touchdown. So defense obviously was the biggest to blame because they couldn't get a stop when it mattered the most, but the offense had a few big setbacks that gave Detroit more and more life and more breathing room and more momentum. So it was good, but it was not good enough. So this Sunday night game is going to be really intriguing. Both teams are trying to clinch a playoff spot. The Seattle Seahawks want to lock up the division, while the Green Bay Packers just want to have a shot and make it a wild card berth because they lost to the Lions twice. So the best they can hope for is the 5th seed. So they don't want to be another 7th seed, or they don't want to be that 6th spot where they're just waiting to see, who could potentially clinch that spot. So when you look at these matchups for the last, I want to say maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, the home team usually has the advantage, just like the Eagles and the Steelers matchups. especially with Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson were the two starting quarterbacks of both teams. I mean, you look at 2014 in that NFC Championship game, the Seattle Seahawks, they held on to win that game. 2019 in the divisional round at Lambeau Field, it was Green Bay. So I don't know if that trend is going to continue now that Geno Smith and Jordan Love are the new quarterbacks at the helm. But honestly, I like Seattle in this game. I like their defense a lot. I like the amount of talent that their offense has to, match up really well against a very vulnerable and injured Green Bay defense. Who knows if they're going to still have Jair Alexander or Edgerrin Cooper. But, yeah, I like the Seahawks here. All they got to do is just not screw up, and they're going to be in good shape. And if the Packers somehow want to avoid losing another game on the road, they need to make sure they hold on to the football, and they got to force a couple of key takeaways. Because if they give the Seahawks any late chances, they're going to eat those mistakes alive, and they're going to give Green Bay a very bitter and very agonizing defeat. So I'll say the Seahawks win a very close game. I think it'll come down to a walk-off field goal, 27-24. And after I get into these Monday night games, I'm going to talk about the potential playoff scenarios that some of these teams will be in if they want to clinch a playoff spot. So hold on to your seats. Let's get into the Minnesota Vikings versus the Chicago Bears. There's nothing else I need to say about the Bears. They flat out quit. 4 yards of offense in the first half, 24-0 at halftime, end up losing 38-13 in the fourth quarter. Caleb Williams gets sacked 7 times. The defense gives up 320 yards to Brock Purdy and a 49ers offense that is just so banged up on all 3 levels. No Christian McCaffrey, no Jordan Mason, no Trent Williams, no Brandon Ayuk, yet they still let up 38 points to that offensive unit. And the Minnesota Vikings are literally in the opposite direction because everybody kept hyping up the fact that Kirk Cousins was making his return to Minnesota, but Sam Darnold was flat out tremendous. 5 touchdown passes, a perfect passer rating in the second half, and he would have scored on all of his drives in that second half if it were not for a missed field goal by Will Reichard. Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, they were flat out phenomenal. They combined for 260 yards and scored all 5 of their touchdowns, or were responsible for all 5 of those touchdown receptions because Aaron Jones provided the knockout score, obviously, in the fourth quarter. And even though the defense let it become a 21-21 ball game in the fourth quarter, their special teams forced a huge fumble on a kickoff, that gave the Vikings all the momentum in the world in that final period. And on Kirk Cousins' final 2 drives of the game, he throws an interception and then turns the ball over on downs on 4th down on a desperation drive, if you will. So, once again, it wasn't pretty, but it was just enough. Their offense was tremendous. They carried the way. And the defense, they made the biggest stops when it mattered the most. Just perfect complementary football on all 3 phases. And they have plenty of momentum heading into this game. Actually, whoops, I lost the link for a second. But I'll talk about what Minnesota needs to do to make the playoffs in just a minute. I think that they're going to win this game. I don't know if they clinch a... Actually, no. Yeah, if they win this game, they will clinch a playoff spot. So I like their offense in this game. But more importantly, I think their defense is going to set the tone from the beginning. I think that, the Bears offense, I mean, they've lost 7 straight now. Right? Is it 7 straight? Yes, 7 in a row. Their offense has just completely fallen apart. They've lost all their energy. They lost all their desire because with 3 straight walk-off defeats, they just don't have any more energy. And it just feels like the defense just flat out gave up because, the head coach is gone. They always find a way to walk into these very avoidable defeats. And now you're going up against the Minnesota Vikings team that is not going to take their foot off the gas. I don't expect their offense to essentially light it up like they did last week, but as long as Sam Darnold continues to play efficient and as long as he doesn't turn the ball over, then I think they're going to be in very good shape. So I'll say the Vikings win this convincingly, 28-13. And I know that the scores that I have are pretty low scoring, but with the exception of a few, I don't see it being that. I don't see a lot of these games being like a 37-34 or 38-7. There are a few exceptions, but not in this one. So now we get to the final one between the Falcons and the Las Vegas Raiders. If Aiden O'Connell is not healthy enough to play, then Desmond Ridder actually has a chance to get revenge against his former team. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if it happened because the Falcons, they've lost 4 in a row. Their defense has been flat out abysmal. And Kirk Cousins, after starting off the season with 17 touchdown passes and 7 interceptions in his first 9 starts, is entering this game with 0 touchdowns and 8 picks and 4 straight losses. Let me repeat that. 4 straight defeats, 0 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and he's leading the latter category by a wide margin. Well, not really a wide margin, but he's leading that category with 15 for the season. How is this even possible? I mean, listen, I knew that the Falcons were not going to have that long of a road in the playoffs, but after starting off the season 6-3, I would have at least thought that they would win at least a few more games to secure their chances. Now they're second place in the division, and they're not even the 9th best team in the conference. It's flat out pathetic, and to use my dad's favorite word, it's flat out pitiful that they are in this situation right now because they should be a lot better roster-wise than what they've shown on the field over these last few weeks. So, to be quite honest, I got the Raiders winning this game. It's not going to be pretty, and I know that it's a long shot, but listen, we saw the amount of chances that they had last week against Tampa Bay. All it took was a second half collapse and a fourth quarter shutdown for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to somehow pull away by 15 points. And unfortunately, it took Aiden O'Connell going down for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to finally wake up and realize, oh crap, we actually have a divisional win and a playoff spot to lock up. Let's actually play with some fight. And you know what? That's what allowed them to pull ahead in the final minutes. So I think that the Raiders will win a pretty close game. And you know what? I think Max Crosby takes over the game on defense. And more importantly, on offense, Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, those are the 2 focal points. And with how atrocious the Falcons' passing defense has been, I can see it happen because they're dead last in sacks. They're 25th against the pass. I think they're 25th in points allowed as well, or somewhere in that category. But the point is, they have not exceeded expectations. They've not even come close to meeting expectations, especially in that 4-game losing streak. And the more that Kirk Cousins decides to turn the ball over, the more games that they're going to lose. So I'll say the Raiders win 20-16. All right. Now let's get into these playoff scenarios because these are extremely important. We're heading into the final stretch. Let's start with the AFC. The Steelers need a win against the Philadelphia Eagles to clinch a playoff berth, or Miami needs to lose or tie at Houston, and Indianapolis needs to lose. So if the Steelers don't beat the Eagles, then they need the Dolphins and the Colts to lose that game, which is to lose their games, which is more than realistic because Miami's going up against Houston and Indianapolis is going up against Denver. So can definitely see that happen. Houston, Texas, they could clinch a playoff berth and the AFC South if they win and if the Colts lose at Denver. Again, very realistic that could happen. The Vikings, I just said, they need a win against the Chicago Bears, or if that doesn't happen by any inexplicable way, the Rams need to lose or tie at San Francisco, or the Seahawks need to lose or tie. So if the Vikings don't win, they need the Rams or the Seahawks to lose, which LA, I don't know. LA, that's a coin flip. Seattle, that is also a coin flip. The Eagles, they could clinch the NFC East with a win and a Washington loss, and the Packers could clinch a playoff berth with a win and an Atlanta loss. And a Rams 49ers tie. But, I mean, who knows if that's going to happen. So those are the playoff scenarios. And with that being said, It's time to end another episode. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. This cough is going to go away, I promise you. So I'm going to be in great spirits in the next week or two. So pray for me. Love you all. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the middle stretch of December. And we'll see you again for week 16. Peace.